The Dice Tower is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. And by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com. The Dice Tower, episode 592.
The best of 2004, 15 years ago.
Welcome to the Dice Tower, a podcast about board games and card games, and especially the people who play them. On today's show, Jeff has a foolproof method for splitting the rent. We share a tale of amazement, and we open up the mailbag with questions about game accessories, game weight, and advantages provided by historical context. Then we look back at our own history with our top 10 games from 2004, 15 years ago. I'm Eric Summerer, and here's your host, the White Goodman to my Peter LaFleur, Tom Vassell.
Can we be the announcers?
Yeah, probably. I didn't know their names, though.
Well, one's Cotton, isn't it?
Could be. The guys from the Ocho?
That's a bold strategy, Cotton.
The Ocho.
Yeah, wait, why am I this really horrible bad guy?
Anyway, I'm Eric Summerer.
I'm Tom Vassell, and we're here to talk about board games and the people who play them. I don't know what else I was supposed to say there. I feel like I missed some sort of cue coming in.
No, all is well. I was just saying before we got started that I really miss the weather in Florida, having come back from the Dice Tower cruise to an ice storm up here in Connecticut with branches falling on my house. It's been an interesting couple of weeks, and I kind of wish that the weather were, Florida temperatures.
And I was, giving him some extreme sympathy.
No, you weren't. No, you weren't. You're
saying things along the lines of, I am very fortunate to be where I am, and I understand what you're going through.
No, folks, he was laughing. He's like, oh, this morning it was 51 degrees, and we had to drive to the gym, and oh, man, woe is us.
Who are you guys going to believe, me or Eric?
Me, obviously.
Does that sound like something I would say?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so folks, if you're listening to this, first of all, for those of you who have backed our Kickstarter, we really appreciate it.
We do. Thank you.
It has been a wild, crazy ride, but we are glad that you have come along with us. And if you haven't been back to it since we started, we've added several Kickstarters, several promos, including a promo for Rising Sun and for Zombicide Invaders. And several other promos too. So we're also adding pictures of some of the stuff, and of course that plush panda is still there.
Yeah, I'm all about that plush panda. I want to back it just to make sure I get one of those.
Yeah, you might get one. We'll see. But yeah, it's been really fun, and I shouldn't say fun. That's kind of a lie. Since it funded, it's been fun.
Good.
I think that's the best way to go about saying that. I mean, we're really glad, folks, that for those of you who did back and stuff. But yeah, running a Kickstarter is a bit stressful. Anyway, this is the last time you'll hear from us because it ends Thursday at midnight. I meant to end it Friday at midnight, but by saying midnight, it changed back to Thursday. It's
okay.
Anyhow, it ends midnight on Thursday, so if you're going to back us, don't delay.
Oh, boy.
But meanwhile, let's talk about some games. So, Eric, let's hear about Coma Naughts, and I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about it, too.
Sure. Coma Naughts, I mentioned briefly if you watched Dice Tower tonight, but we haven't talked about it here on the podcast. Coma Naughts is the new Jerry Hawthorne game, the new adventure book game. If you've played Stuffed Fables, you know what I'm talking about. You got a book with various settings and text that you read, sort of like a choose-your-own-adventure style book. In Coma Naughts, there is a brilliant scientist who has fallen into a coma, and you need his intellect to save the world, so you as a team of adventurers go into his subconscious to try and track down what they call the prime ID, the inner demon that is plaguing him, something like fear or shame or regret. This like psychological being that manifests as a demon sort of thing. And these folks live in what they call coma zones, which are distinct sections of his psyche that are sometimes a separate time period, or there's one that's based on a video game he played as a kid. There's one that's from a Scooby-Doo style cartoon series that he watched. So each of these zones, coma zones, has a different style. And you will be traveling between all of these, trying to track down which one is the prime ID. At the beginning of the game, you draw 5 of these, and you sort of shuffle them up, and one of these, secretly, is the prime ID. And it's sort of placed under a stack, and you pull some clue cards that are related to this prime ID, and the other 4 go off to the side. You know that wherever you start is not the prime ID's hometown. But beyond that, he could be, the prime ID could be any of the other 4 that you've chosen at the beginning of the game. Just like
Which makes it a little random because you could play 2 to 5 different zones.
Yes. You are moving through a particular adventure trying to get clues. By completing certain tasks, you will get a clue card that relates to where you're supposed to go to track down the prime ID. This could have you leaving a zone halfway through its little storyline. So if you think of this, unlike Stuffed Fables, where you've got Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, a self-contained adventure, the entire book, or at least 5 zones of the book, are available to you in any given game. You're jumping all over the place in the storybook, and you're trying to figure out which section you're supposed to focus on. So by earning a clue, you get like a little story snippet that may have a very clear path. You're like, oh, that's definitely shame, or that's definitely regret. But based on what your possibilities are, it could be either of those 2 or any of the 4 as you're trying to figure out where you're supposed to go. And if you go to the wrong place, you might play through an entire plot line, get to the end of it, find out, oh, that's not the prime ID, that's just a regular ID that's messing with us. And now that we've defeated that, we have to go to one of the other 3 locations to find who we're supposed to track down. It has very similar gameplay to Stuffed Fables. You're drawing dice from a bag and rolling them, spending them to do actions, doing ranged attacks and distance attacks and movement, and solving little mini puzzles and tracking things down in different sections of the board, exploring things. A lot of the things I love about Stuffed Fables, I really enjoy about this too. The exploration, the style of the different zones. That one video game zone, you take the standees out of their bases and put them flat on the board so it looks like you're in a 2D platformer. That's kind of cool. I love this innovative theme. I think it's easier in this game to attack. You don't necessarily need a ranged weapon to do a ranged attack. You can just pick up a rock and throw it at something. There's some streamlining that has happened with the Stuffed Fables system here. However, there are a couple of niggly quibbles I have with the system. The mystery of this game, trying to find out what the prime ID is, involves not really knowing what all of these clues refer to. You can play this as a standalone or as a campaign game. The campaign just adds a little bit of extra plot and ensures that you don't see the same prime ID from game to game. There's like a little sticker system that says, all right, I've beaten this one. I'm not going to face that one again. But if you play this enough, I feel like the clue cards will become more obvious. Like, I will know that little story snippet is fear. And so that mystery element will disappear after a certain number of plays if you're playing the standalone scenarios. It's a little tricky to set up this game because there's so much secret information. Having to track down a clue, there's like a 7-digit number. Once you've decided what the prime ID is, you have to set it up and get all those proper clues, and that could also be memorized. There's a potential for some looping to happen. If you could get stuck on a board because you keep drawing black dice, and there's this respawn rule that wasn't in Stuffed Fables that can cause the bad guys to keep coming back. And if you don't clear the board and move on to the next board space, you could just keep having bad guys show up and get stuck on certain sections, and that can get a little tedious. Still, these small quibbles, because Stuffed Fables was so amazing and one of my favorite games ever, that having these small quibbles is, it takes it down a notch, maybe to like an 8.5 for me. I still like the exploration. I love the style. I love the theme. This is a fascinating game that I really want to explore more. I just fear that there might be a finite aspect to that. How about you, Tom? What do you think?
The thing is the game is kind of a mixed bag, but at the end of the day, I have to say it's worth getting. It's worth getting because I think the story is well written and extremely interesting. I especially liked the in-between stuff between if you play through a campaign. You probably haven't seen any of that.
I've only seen, because I've always done like new people. The only thing it adds is a couple of paragraphs. Is there a lot in those paragraphs at the end of the book?
I don't know. It just gives you kind of a glimpse at the world that surrounds what's going on. But I like the writing and stuff involved, and I like the idea. I like that it inside his head, it feels like you're a mix between dream and reality, which is kind of cool. And so that part really elevates it. I do feel like it's a little bit on the rails. I don't see a lot of replayability per location. I mean, when you go to a location second time, it's not like, oh, that's a surprise. Sure, the ID might be different.
Yeah, there's some small branching paths. Like you can take a couple of side quests or different directions on a particular map board.
Sure, but and sometimes none of that matters because you draw some dice and it just doesn't work out and you die.
Yeah.
There's some good luck in the game. So I like it, but it's because of the story. I think that this system is not as good as just maybe a straight role-playing game would have been. But the writing and the fact that you don't need a dungeon master elevates it for me. So I like it. I don't think it's amazing. I think it's really well done.
Yeah, one last note I want to make on Coma Naughts is that the subject matter is definitely more mature than it was with Stuffed Fables. This is not one. Well, sometimes a game says 14 plus and it's for complexity or just because they don't want to safety test it for 10-year-olds. This is definitely a much more serious, psychological, sometimes disturbing product. There's a couple of Cthulhu-esque or Lovecraftian scenes that are very surreal, dreamlike, horrific scenes that happen that I would not want with my kids playing with. While they could handle the mechanics, no problem, thematically and subject matter-wise, this isn't a kid's game.
I agree. So let's continue talking about non-kid. No, okay, that's no segue here. All right, so let's talk about an expansion for Merlin. This is about King Arthur. Eric, have you played Merlin?
I have not, no.
Oh, this will be a little trickier. Okay, so in Merlin, you have a knight and you have Merlin pieces on this giant rondel. And on your turn of the game, you roll 4 dice, 3 of your color and 1 white die, and you move your knight. Let's say I roll a 3 yellow and I'm the yellow player, I would move my yellow knight 3 spaces clockwise and do whatever that space says, and the spaces do a variety of different things. If I use the white die, I can move the Merlin to a space and do whatever it says, but Merlin I can move clockwise or counterclockwise. Now, while that might sound like it's set in stone, there are different flags that you can get through some of the actions that let you manipulate the dice and let you move to different spots on the board, etc., etc. So what does Arthur do? Well, it adds a 5th person in the most blatant, I shouldn't say the most blatant, there's probably more blatant, the most blatant bit of lying. The expansion time is the exact same as the base game. And I don't know how that's physically possible since you have an extra die for each person per turn, times 6, times 4. 24 more turns are being taken. Do they think maybe the turns are faster?
I don't know.
Anyway, it adds an inner rondel that's inside the outer rondel. And inside this rondel, your King Arthur piece is moving. He also moves in both directions and just does a few other things. It also replaces a couple of the flags with some better flags, I think, that help manipulate the dice a little bit better. And it adds some Celts who you can fight to get points or whatever. It does not add much. It's pretty easy. I taught it to some people who had never played Merlin before, and so they were able to play with the expansion very easily. I like it. I would probably always play with it because it doesn't add that much. But if you don't have it and you can't find it, I don't know that I would go way out of my way to get it either. So I like it, but it's not necessary. Just some more stuff. That's Merlin, Arthur.
Next for me is a new one from Queen Games. It's called Franchise. The designer here is Christwart Conrad, whom I'm not familiar with, but I do know the art designer Ian O'Toole, and I really like the art style here. It's sort of a 50s early World of Franchises art style. You are running one of these franchises. One of them's a burger place. There's a dry cleaning establishment. Basically, you're trying to get market share on this map of the United States.
Does not matter.
It really doesn't. No, it's just art on your little player board. You are trying to expand on this map of the U.S., and it has a little bit of a power grid look to the map. You've got lots of cities. In fact, there's cities and towns on the map. The cities have large circles on them, and different size cities will have more spaces in these circles. And then there's little towns with only a single circle space on them. You start out on some, single one or two locations at the beginning of the game. You're trying to expand these networks and get, a larger footprint. There's this neat aspect that as you claim a city, so you can expand to an adjacent city, you have to pay some cost to sometimes to go way across the country, you're paying a lot. If you're doing just a short little hop, sometimes it's free. Expand into a city, and that will earn you income based on how many empty spaces there are in that city. So if you're the only one in like New York, you're going to get a lot of money each turn. However, in order to score that city, you have to fill it up. And not only can you expand outward, you can also put an additional franchise, an additional house on a city you're in. That's one of your opportunities there. So as you do that, though, you're filling up the spaces, and now you're making less money in that city. So do you keep a big city as your like money maker, knowing that you're not going to earn any points there, or do you push to complete the city, because then there's sort of an area majority thing going on, and whoever has the largest presence in that city when it fills will get the most points. And if you don't complete a city before the end of the game, then you don't get any points for that city. It's an interesting push-pull, interesting decision to make. Of course, you're competing with other people as they horn in on your territory. Maybe that decision isn't yours anymore. If somebody decides to come into New York, you can no longer keep it as your money-making machine. You have to fight for the majority in that zone. There's sort of rule-breaking tiles where you can expand twice in a turn, or put two new houses into a zone where you're in to try and beat someone to that area majority. Then there's group, like section bonuses that can earn you points. The whole thing moves pretty quickly, and I like it. The board isn't a whole lot to look at. It's one of these.
I like it.
Do you like it? It uses very strong colors. It's very clear what's going on. You can obviously see that this giant pink line, the $8 connection route, is there, and it's very different from the blue line or the green line to make all these connections. But it sacrifices, the prettiness of the board for usability. But hey, that works when you're trying to look at the board and figure out how to make these connections. I did really like it. It moved fast. It offers a neat challenge. It's a cool economic game. I like Franchise from Queen.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. It's a lot. I think, folks, it's a little more vicious than Eric's letting on. It's really in your face.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised by this one. There's very few games out there that have this level of no luck. There's literally no luck in the game.
It's true.
And shades of Power Grid to a bit?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, so that was Franchise. Let's jump to something very similar called Once Upon a Castle.
What?
Today is bad segue day, Eric, so just flow with it.
Okay, looking forward to the next one.
Once Upon a Castle is from Blue Orange Games, and it is, I think, the first roll and write kids game. So what it is you have this castle that you're drawing on a thing. They give you two sides. One, the castle is drawn and you can like just trace the lines. On the other side, you can draw whatever castle you want. On your turn, you roll these 2 big dice, and you have a board next to your castle, and you put tokens on this board based on what resources you roll. So maybe you roll a wood and a stone. So you put a token on a wood and a stone on this kind of grid on your board. Every other player can do one of the dice that you roll. You do both of them. If you completely fill it in a column or a row on the board, you then remove all those tokens and get to draw that part on your castle. You can also roll people. There's a bunch of little people in your castle and just fill in people. The more people you get, the more points you have at the end of the game. You're also drawing towers in the game, which can be worth 2 or 5 points. You can draw walls, which give you no points, but once you have a wall drawn, you can then draw windows inside the wall, which will give you points. Also, the first person to build all the towers gets a bonus. There's one section of the tower, a center tower that you can build that will give you cards from a deck that just give you points for drawing them. You can also play a more advanced version of the game in which the cards have special powers and do various things. And it also gives you a few more options as you're building your castle. Very simple game. You roll 2 dice, you take those actions, and everyone else picks one of those. But where you put the pieces on your board is going to really change how it works. Not everyone's going to put them in the same spots. I really like this one. It is an excellent roll and write game for kids, and I would not even be completely opposed to playing it with adults. Probably a little too simple, but I didn't hate playing it with the kids is what I mean. You know, and it teaches them to say, okay, yes, I could quick do these little small short rows and columns and get this stuff, but if I save up my resources and do these longer ones, I can do things that are worth bigger points. So I'm very impressed with this one. I don't think it's in America yet. I have an English copy of it, but I haven't seen it in American stores. But I would imagine it's coming. Sometimes Blue Orange games take a while. In fact, I just heard from them that Planet is coming to America.
Oh, good.
Which was a game I was like raving about, the magnet sides to it from Blue Orange Games. Mm-hmm. And I have a copy and people are like, where can you get this? I was like, Germany.
Yeah.
But it's coming to America, I think, in March or April. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, so hopefully the same thing will happen with Once Upon a Castle.
Sounds like a neat medieval theme game, and the absolute opposite of a medieval themed game is futuristic robot combat. So the game I'm going to talk about is Volt. This is a revision of Emerson Matsuuchi's early game of a similar name. It was Volt Robot Battle Arena originally. And this is from Heidelbar Games, which is Heidelberger Spielverlag, their new title. It's got new art, all upgraded. Annika Bruning, Marina Fehrenbach, and Stephen Hamilton teaming up for the art there. It's a robot battle combat game in which you have to earn points. It's a race to earn a certain number of points. You can do this in 2 ways: by destroying an opponent, giving them 3 hits, and whoever gets the last hit on a robot will get the point for destroying that robot, or by tagging a victory point tag. There's 6 numbered locations on any of these boards, and each round of the game, one of these tokens comes out that says, all right, this goes on space number 1. And if you can end the round standing on that space, you will also earn a point. Each round that one of these isn't claimed, a new one's going to come out, and so you may have multiple locations to tag at any given moment. You program your robots for a round using red and blue dice. The original Volt gave you a red, white, and a blue die, and it was, not that terribly confusing, but you could use all of those dice as either weapons or movement. This one backs it off and says you can use the red dice for shooting and the blue dice for movement, and you can use any combination of 3 of those dice. So I could shoot twice, move once, move twice, shoot once, and I can do them in any order I want. And I can move up, down, left, right. I can shoot in any of the 8 directions. So now I'm playing this game of guess. Where do I think my opponents will be? When do I want to move? When do I want to shoot? Do I think I'll be able to hit somebody knowing where they're going to go? You have this focus location of these victory tokens in the center. So when do I get in position to try and shoot that thing, or do I try and move last and push everybody that would be on that space off of it so that I can, tag the space at the end of the round? I think all the little small improvements that they made here from the original version are great. They made the weapons a little bit more clear. There's a nice tutorial version. There's these towers that are, somewhat unnecessary, but they hold initiative tokens so that as you're programming your robots, when you're done, you grab whatever initiative token you want. It breaks ties. But it makes it look like a cool arena. The robots all have different sculpts now. I mean, this is a worthy upgrade to an already great game. I own the original, but I kind of want to get this new version of Volt. Thumbs up.
Good. I'm glad you like it.
Me too.
So, quick comparison to Robo Rally. Which would you rather play?
Oh boy, they're very different. The one thing that Volt really does is you don't have a hand of cards. Robo Rally has more interesting interactions with the board. Volt is a much simpler play space, so it's much more about reading your opponents than it is about navigating the obstacle course, whereas Robo Rally is about how do I get from point A to point B, avoiding everybody else or maybe running into them on purpose, successfully. It's much more of a longer-term goal game, whereas Volt is sort of an impulse sort of thing. This round, what's going to happen? Am I going to hang back? Am I going to rush? Am I going to shoot someone? Am I going to push them off the board? I had a super epic section in our game where we all just happened to line up in one direction, and one player pushed the other three of us off of a cliff. Just we were all lined up, and he went, I move 6, and voomp, managed to push us all off, and he practically won the game in one move.
Wow. All right. Well, speaking of winning games with one move, here's a game that has nothing to do with that. Master of the Galaxy. This game also has nothing to do with He-Man, because he's not the master of the universe. In fact, the first time I played Master of the Galaxy, I was sitting next to some people playing Masters of Orion. And I was like, well, look at you guys. You're just master of one planet. We're master of the whole galaxy.
Were you still trash talking
Master
later?
of the Galaxy, I said, I wish I was playing Masters of Orion. So Master of the Galaxy sounds amazing. Or at least it did to me. It's a bag building game where you have cubes in this bag. You start with an alien race with all these open spots on the card for cubes. And on your turn, you pull 3 cubes from the bag, and you can place them on your card, or you can place them on the board between planets to kind of move and settle new planets. And then as you get more cards and technologies, you can place cubes on those cards, and eventually you will win by one of various ways, by getting 9 bases on the board, or a couple other ways that I forget about because they're boring. I like bag building games a lot. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you throw cubes into a bag or something else, and tokens into a bag, and then you pull them out, but you'll be able to manipulate the contents of that bag over the course of the game. You can manipulate your bag in Masters of the Galaxy or Master of the Galaxy, but it's done in not a very interesting way. Also, I should mention, horrible rulebook. Like, very densely missing factoids and anyhow. So you want to add more cubes to the bag. You start with, I think, 5 of every color and some black cubes. Black cubes let you remove cubes from the board, which means if you draw them at the very beginning of the game, that's simply kind of just tough luck.
Yeah, nothing.
And it's not like you're like, well, at least I got them out of the bag, because you throw them back in. So I think, anyway, according to the rules that aren't very clear.
Yeah, I think so.
So how do you get more cubes? There's 2 ways to get more cubes. You can put a cube on a planet of your starting solar system, and as you get other solar systems, you can put a cube. To put 2 of that same color cube in your bag, which, if you think about it, is literally just adding 1 cube of that color to your bag, since you had to put a cube out. If that cube matches the color of that system, then you put 3 cubes in the bag, which is slightly better. You can also throw any cube of a color in a bag if you discard cards. The more cards you discard, the more cubes you can throw in your bag. That doesn't sound bad, except for the fact that you have to spend a lot of cubes and do a lot of things to get just one card, which you then probably want to do something with. But no, let's discard it to throw an extra cube of red in the bag. Then you can put cubes out to go from planet to planet, and as you put out the cubes, you suddenly realize halfway through that I don't think I have enough cubes in the bag to even finish this route. This game feels like a quarter-baked potato. I don't mind the idea of the game. When I went over the rules, I was like, wow, this sounds like it's going to be a good game. And it just wasn't. It's boring to pull these 3 cubes out and be like, oh, I can put this one here. I can put this. I guess I'll throw these back in the bag. And then when you get and then there's lots of fiddly rules. There's combat cards that you stick between 2 systems that you fight each other by putting cubes on. It's a mess. And I'm not even, here's the thing. I know, like, when I showed it to Sam was like, ooh, cubes, that's a good, 4X game. I get it, right? Some people are like, well, you don't want to play a Euro Galactic game. The fact was, I really did. I really thought all these rules sounded good. But the fact that you cannot manipulate your bag hardly at all just makes it just a big luck fest that you're pulling these cubes out. Really dislike this one. Master of the I can't say something. I was going to say Pupixi, but that's not a word. Okay, Galaxy.
Yeah, I played this one as well. This was on my must-check-out list at Essen, and I made sure I went there early and got a demo, and I had a very similar impression to you. I didn't enjoy it. That the bag building was slow. I felt like, you start acquiring all of these cards in your zone, in your sort of tableau, which you can assign cubes to and do cool things with, but then you're trying to look at what your opponents are doing and trying to figure out there's all of these crazy things to keep track of. And then when those battles happen, it's very unclear how that works. And just the whole thing was a slog, and it just didn't have momentum or excitement to it that I was looking for. And yeah, it was off of my list pretty quickly after playing the demo.
Yeah, when I saw the alien cards, I was really excited because they had different rows and columns of different color cubes. And I was like, ooh, this one has shorter columns, but a lot of the same color. Okay, oh, this one does this. And then I played it, and I was like, oh, you know what? Who cares? They're all essentially the same. They just need different colors and combos. And yeah, oh well. Master of the Galaxy. I need to be uplifted, Eric. I need to be uplifted.
Let's do it. Tales of Amazement. I got interested in hobby board gaming a few years ago. Doctors diagnosed my father with cancer just a couple years after that. His diagnosis, the answer for why he had such a sudden and intense pressure in his chest, accompanied with difficulty breathing, proved to be a roller coaster, as doctors couldn't nail it down in the initial weeks of his seeking their aid. But the eventual answer was troubling: mesothelioma. Aggressive, angry cancer that attacks the lining of the lungs and other organs. A few months into his fight with his tumor, an assault that involved chemo, my dad came to visit me. I joked that I was going to make him play some of my latest acquired games, but that joke became a reality as he eagerly agreed. I should have known better. My dad is supremely interested in people who have interests, if that makes sense. If you're excited about something, he's in. Passion breeds passion. My game collection was still a small affair at the time, and the title that would later become our favorite game, Terraforming Mars, wouldn't be released for another year or so. For our first time out, we settled on Elder Sign, the Lovecraftian co-op descent into a dark museum where monsters lurk and doorways between dimensions must be closed. Dad took to the gameplay quickly, despite how easily he usually tired because of his cancer treatments. I could tell this game, his first foray into games that weren't department store shelf staples like Risk and chess, had his attention. The options, the mechanics, the theme, the fact that we played on the same team. I think he liked that most of all. The elder god whose interdimensional invasion we were tasked with preventing was Nyarlathotep. We did relatively well, growing and using our respective arsenals of items and spells at a nice clip, but we didn't quite make the required elder sign quota required to seal this particular big bad away. For that, we proceeded to the last-ditch part of the game, where you abandon your attempts to contain your nemesis and fight him instead. Like everything in the game, this is achieved through dice rolls, with each specifically outlined successful roll getting you one step closer to winning, forcing the Elder God to remove a Doom token from his character card. No more tokens, no more big bad. Our gameplay went from moderate intensity to a barn burner. We seemed evenly matched with our foe, rolling just well enough to prevent his victory. Slowly, his long line of Doom tokens began to disappear, but so did our pile of clue tokens, our only saving grace on unsuccessful rolls. On a bad roll, a player has to discard one. If you have none and don't meet the roll requirements, it's game over, man. Game over. Close to the end, both sides were running low. He was down to one Doom token, and we'd depleted our clues. We had one more shot. 2 dice left, 2 specific, identical faces needed. Dice, nay, destiny cubes, in hand, I looked at my dad. He gave me a small smile. I rolled. Watching them felt like a slow-motion bit in a movie. They stopped. We leaned in. Tell me you see where this is going. The required dice faces stared up at us, bite-sized victory pictures that looked quite lovely where they'd come to a stop. My dad and I cheered, pumped our arms. There may have been some very bad dancing involved. It remains, to date, my favorite win in any game, both digital and analog. A few years later, my father is still fighting, still alive, and we still talk about the day we sucker-punched Nyarlathotep back into the void. We still proclaim it with the same fondness, the same passion, the same life. I can't speak for him, but for me, the reason this particular run-through on this particular game of despair became such a fond, bright memory beacon is that it represents something bigger. Getting to deliver a satisfying knockout punch to an otherworldly monstrosity gave me hope, for some reason, that my father has a chance in the fight against one that's much scarier. I love this hobby for many reasons, but the fact that it offered genuine comfort during a very dark time is at the top of the list. What a gift. Huzzah.
I do like that.
That's really cool.
Thanks for sending that story in. We appreciate stuff like that. If you guys have stuff like that, I like this whole. It's just a good thing to remember. Those moments, like that.
Mm-hmm.
All righty. Well, Jeff knows how to take any simple concept and make it complicated. Well, not really, but to go to the next level.
Next level, yeah.
That's what he's going to do here.
Yeah, good segue, boss.
3, 2, 1, go.
It's time for Game Tech with Jeff Engelstein, where we find out how games really work.
A few years ago here on Game Tech, I talked about one of my favorite ways of dividing things up. I cut, you choose. It was a favorite of my mom's when dealing with me and my sister. And this algorithm has one person divide something up, and then the other gets to pick which half they want. Now, this method works well and has a lot of great mathematical properties, but it also relies partially on the assumption that the people value things equally, and also that something can be divided in any way you want. But very often those criteria don't apply. A classic problem economists have studied is how to split the rent amongst roommates. There's actually a shockingly large number of papers about this topic. So let's say that 2 people share an apartment with 2 bedrooms, and the rooms aren't the same. Let's say that one has a big window, and the other has no window at all. We'll call them the light room and the dark room for short. Now, it seems reasonable that the person with the light room should pay more rent, but how much more, and who gets the room? Now, you can't use I cut, you choose here. You can't give someone half of the light room and half of the dark one. There's only one way to divide up the rooms. And maybe you really, really want a window, but I don't care all that much. I'll just be playing video games in the dark anyway. Now, mathematicians have developed a variety of methods for resolving situations like this. Here's one that's relatively simple and easy to understand. Now, let's say the total rent is $2,000 per month. What you do is have each of the two roommates secretly write down how much they think the light room is worth and how much the dark room is worth. The only rule is that the total has to equal the total of $2,000 rent. So you write down that there should be $1,400 rent, say, for the light room, and $600 for the dark room. You think the light room is much more valuable. I, on the other hand, don't care. So I write down that I think the rent should simply be $1,000 for the light and $1,000 for the dark. Now we both reveal what we wrote down. You wrote a higher value for the light room, $1,400 versus $1,000. So you get that room. I wrote a higher value for the dark room, $1,000 versus $600, so I get that one. And the rent we have to pay is the average of what we each put down for the room. So for the light room, you wrote $1,400 and I wrote $1,000. So you would pay $1,200. Similarly, I wrote $1,000 for the dark room and you wrote $600, so I would pay $800. Now notice that in both cases, we each paid less than we put down. You're going to pay $1,200 even though you wrote $1,400, and I'm going to pay $800 even though I wrote $1,000. Now this makes this method what's called an envy-free method of dividing things up. We both end up paying less than what we thought the rent division should be, so we feel good. Now, I could, of course, try to use my knowledge to game this system. If I know that you really want the room with the window, I might be tempted to slant my division a little bit up in that direction. So if I split 1,100, 900 towards the light room, I would still end up with the dark room, but I would pay even less. The danger, of course, is that if I misread what you want, I may end up paying more than $1,000 for the light room, which is money I didn't really want to spend. So my best strategy is probably just to stick with what I actually think the value is. Now, if you have more than two people dividing things up, this algorithm can still work, but the math gets a bit more complex. There are, not surprisingly, websites where you and your roommates can go and enter in your values for different rooms, and the server crunches the numbers and comes up with rents for everyone. So the next time you need to split up something that's not as easy as pie, take a look at this method. It may work for you. This is Jeff Engelstein with Game Tech.
So would this concept work when it's time to divvy up who's staying in what room when we go to a convention?
Those rooming with Sam or Jason, I'll give $500. No, that's an interesting concept, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking about that when he was explaining it. I was thinking, well, if I don't care which room I'm in, I'm going to really underbid the other person. You know, so that's kind of an interesting concept, but to gamify that seems very difficult.
Yeah. It's neat because if you like you said, if you try to game it too much, you might end up with what you don't want in the first place and paying more for it.
I'm definitely in a different frame of mind when I got the email from Jeff and it said rent, and I was thinking, are we doing musicals now? I don't know why that's in my head.
Well, they just did Rent Live on Fox, right?
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
I'm behind on this live stuff. All righty. Yeah. Speaking of things that we're behind on, we better answer some questions.
Let's do it.
Mr. Vassal, yes. Do you have any superpowers?
Are you really working on Nothing Personal, Junior?
What are your top 10 candy bars?
And now the Dice Tower will authoritatively, definitely, possibly, maybe answer your questions.
Tom, which way to the bathroom?
Lars would like to know how or to what extent we take our position as professional reviewers into account when reviewing a game. What I mean is, he says, the way you play games is probably very different to many of us. For example, when you review a campaign or legacy-style game, do you consider that many, or perhaps most gamers, won't have the time to play them or might need to play them over much longer periods of time than you? When reviewing a game, do you consider, if you have been sent the deluxe edition, how that might affect your enjoyment compared to a retail version? In Sam's recent top 10 anticipated expansions for 2019, he says that he loves modular expansions because they extend the life of a game. But for many of us who only play 1 to 2 games a week, modular expansions might be more of a hassle. When I get back to playing a game after 6 months or maybe years, I hesitate to put in modular expansions because I can't really guarantee a good experience. Whereas expansions that are basically just more of the same are great because they can just be put in without too much change to the game. I feel that last one for sure. A lot of the time, expansions that or for a game I haven't played recently can be more difficult to get to the table because I'm not as familiar with the base game. Expansions only really work if you've played the base game enough to need more. It's hard to add it right away.
Sure, this is a reason why I don't review a lot of expansions for some games. I review games that I'm pretty well. I like the game a lot. I want to see it with the expansion. But there's been many times where I'm like, all right, it's time to review the expansion. But first, let's play the game again.
Right, yeah.
So here's that. Now, the second question, when reviewing a game, do you consider, if you've been sent the deluxe version, how much that might affect your enjoyment compared to a retail version? Yes, and in fact, I ask publishers to send me the retail version for that very reason. Because I want to know what people can get. Although, when we get deluxe versions, we try to get deluxe versions for the Dice Tower library because I like deluxe versions. And sometimes that line gets blurry because there's not ever going to be a retail version. Because it was on Kickstarter. It's such the whole thing's fuzzy. Or sometimes the difference between the deluxe and the retail version is like, wow. Tasty Minstrels really, they're deluxeified games compared to the non-deluxeified games. Oh my goodness, they're so much nicer. But I do think about that. I do disagree with the first. Well, it's not a disagreeing statement, but he said, when you review a campaign legacy style game, do you consider that many gamers won't have the time to play them or might need to play them over much longer periods of time than you? Sure, but at the same time, I think gamers in general are just all very different.
Yeah.
And sometimes we take a long time to play through a game, while some gamers are like, they're blasting through it. They'll stay up all Saturday to play a game when I won't do that.
Yeah.
So, yes, the biggest problem that a professional reviewer has with the number of games is just that the sheer number of games. So we tend to be, when you get a game and you're like, oh, it's a worker placement game. All right, cool. Seen 20 of those. It's easy to fall into that mode more than anything else. But these are good questions. It's good to be thinking about these things for sure. Lenny says he's been playing board games for over 15 years and war games for over 30. I figured that war games and board games, but anyway.
Yeah, let's not get into that.
Yeah, no, it just seemed odd. I guess maybe by war games he means stuff like miniature games too, which are not necessarily board games.
Okay, sure.
So he's introducing new people to the hobby. He normally would have used Ticket to Ride or King of Tokyo, but they all like Risk. So he chose Risk 2210. Everyone had a good time. The new players enjoyed the mechanics and the huge differences, but the game felt a little dated to him, which I think is reasonable because it is a fairly dated game at this point.
Sure.
His question is, what would your modern replacement for Risk 2210 AD be? My first automatic response would be like, Risk
Legacy.
But there's a lot of games where you could fight people on maps. Like, if you can find Nexus Ops, that's a really great one.
Oh, yeah. The few that I was thinking of are still relatively old. Small World. Or, oh, golly, what was the other one? Oh, there's actually one that might show up on our lists from 15 years ago. Memoir 44.
Yeah, but that's a two-player game, and so I think that one might...
Yeah. Or 8-Minute Empire is a small footprint game that I think has that, armies on the map sort of feel.
Right. Twilight Imperium is a big game.
Well, sure.
Twilight Imperium is just so humongous, though, so keep that in mind when you go into that. And, of course, you have the giant Axis and Allies family. You have Blood Rage and Rising Sun and the CMON, grouping games, which might satisfy that lot too.
Dan heard Mandy, in fact, just last week, talking about BGG game weight. And it suddenly occurred to me that I haven't heard any member of the Dice Tower use it before. I myself regularly check the game weight stats before buying a game or choosing which games to bring to a game night. I think it's very useful, and in some cases I can quite exactly predict which game weight is best suited for which of my friends or family. So my question is, how do you, or why don't you use these stats?
I like to point out everything that I say on the show is, in my opinion, but this especially so, I think it's the most useless statistic on Board Game Geek. Like, I can't think of I just hate it. And there's a couple reasons. One, because it doesn't have any feeling to a person. I'm like, this game is ranked, the weight is 2.43 as opposed to this one, which is 3.17. It's like, what? But secondly, Board Game Geek is ranked by gamers. And while gamers do a good job at telling you if they like a game or not, that's not too bad. But, oh my goodness, about games, they'll be like, oh yeah, this game is a medium game. I'm like, no, it's not. That's a heavy game for some people. And like people will say Ticket to Ride is a light game. It's not really. It's a medium game for a lot of people. But you're thinking gamers. Now you can say, well, yeah, but if that's the case, everyone on Board Game Geek will think the same way. Well, that's the other problem, is that people just rate games whatever they feel like weight-wise. So it's just as subjective as a rating, except I think a rating's useful. A subjective weight doesn't mean anything to me. I just find it to be useless. Maybe if you're comparing things, but if you can tell me the difference between a 2.1 and a 2.4, good for you. I don't get it.
I think I ascribe a little more value to it than you do, Tom, but it is just on the periphery. I will, if I'm looking at a game and I notice that it's a 3 or above a 4 in complexity, then that's somewhat useful, but I really don't rank anything, specifically. I won't say, oh, that 3.6 is far more complicated than that 3.2. Because, yeah, there is that wiggle room. But, compared to if you're looking at two games and one is rated with a 1.2 and the other is a 3.6, well, at least you know that there should be a difference between those two games.
Noel says, do you find that with experience comes the ability to estimate the quality of a game simply by reading its rules without having played it yet? Let's assume, for this thought experiment, that the rules are adequately written. With adequacy being defined as an accurate and effective description of gameplay. Part of my brain believes that board games being tactile things can only really be grasped in the act of playing. But another stubbornly logical part of my brain believes that since rules are, after all, descriptions of gameplay, there should be some sense, however limited and fallible, in which adequately written rules do convey something about the experience of gameplay. So it should be theoretically possible to learn something, not everything, of course, but something about a game's fun factor by reading its rules. Your thoughts?
I think you've hedged your opinion enough there, Noel. I agree. There is something that you can learn from a well-designed, well-laid-out set of rules. But all it's really telling you is the potential for the game. Until you actually get it out on the table. Because, the rules may tell you, oh, these might be cool decisions to make. But until you're forced to make them, the emotional aspect is gone. And that's where I really respond to whether I like a game, whether a game succeeds or fails, is how I feel while I'm playing it. And if I get a sense of adventure, or if I get excited, or if I feel the stress of a difficult decision, then that's something that I'm not going to get just by reading the rules. While I may get excited about the potential of those feelings, I'm not getting that without getting it to the table.
I think I usually can tell if a game is good from reading the rules. Occasionally, I am wrong on that. Masters of the Galaxy is a good one. I thought that would be much better after reading the rules. I can almost always tell you if a game's going to be bad Like, if a game's really bad, I can read the rules and go, oh.
Yeah.
I'd like to apologize to everyone at the table for what we are about to partake in.
Let's just get this over with.
So, yeah, the rules show me a lot.
Steven says, about a year ago, I discovered plastic bands, which are basically rubber bands but can be used for longer-term storage since they won't melt or stick onto the cards. Also, when wrapped lengthwise around cards, the cards are kept together nicely without bending. Now I always keep a box of these plastic bands nearby for whenever I open a new game and start sorting and punching it out. Do you have anything like these that are your go-to upgrades / storage / etc. for games? As in things that you like for your games that are universal and can be used to make nearly any game better for playing or storing?
Well, for me, it's those little plastic containers. I've been using the ones from TV Giochi makes them.
Yeah,
They're really great.
Is it Bitbox or no? It's not Bitbox. It's Geekbox.
Geekbox.
Yeah.
But since I'm printing several thousand of my own custom ones now, they're very similar to the ones that are in the Stonemeyer games, but they'll have a Dice Tower logo on. Yeah,
Nice.
those. I'm sorry, I stick those in all my games, except if the components are too big for them. Then I have a bunch of crayon boxes that I bought at a back-to-school sale. I bought 500 of them.
I have seen the stack of these, folks. There are a lot.
Well, the stack is much smaller than when you saw them, Eric.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're really going down because I'm using them.
Yeah.
And as we're getting the library back. So, as a side note here, we are currently counting all the pieces of the games that were in the library.
Oh.
When I say we, I mean it is a chore. And here's what I'm surprised at. We've lost a whole lot fewer pieces than I thought.
Really? That's good.
Yeah,
I
it
guess.
is pretty nice. And when it is missing a piece, like, we're missing a cube, and I'm like, da-da-da-da-da, I have one.
I can fix this.
But anyway, my go-to game component are little boxes because they're great for storing this stuff. And then you pop the lids off, and you can just pull the pieces right out over the course of the game. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I for games that need it, I like the Plano boxes. If you have a large enough box to stick one of those in there, I love those for organization. But the small containers, in fact, I just did this. I got the Quacks of Quedlinburg. And I was disappointed that I have one of those like cylindrical containers that all sort of screw together into like a big column, and they're just a hair too wide for the box. And I was really bummed after I spent all this time sorting everything, and then I put it all back together, and the lid doesn't quite close. But anyway, I like containers too.
Well, interestingly enough, I'm getting some plastic pieces for Quacks of Quedlinburg that the tokens snap into.
I've heard of this. Somebody on Etsy sells them, right?
Yes, and I was a happy purchaser. I'm hoping they work well. I haven't gotten them yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing how they look.
I'm waiting for one of the token producers like MeepleSource to come out with a set at some point. But for now, I'm going to stick with the
Have
cardboard.
fun spending that kind of cash.
It's true. It's probably going to be a lot.
Anders says there's an aspect of Twilight's struggle that's bugged him since the first time he played the game. By knowing certain events of the Cold War, the players know what to expect in future turns. So he gave an example of the U.S. not putting influence in Poland because he knows that John Paul II will become Pope and solidarity will be formed by Lech Walesa, and the U.S. player will take control of the country no matter what. So his question is, do you think that knowledge of the theme should matter when it comes to the actual gameplay and planning for future turns? Should a player know that Bruce Banner will become the Hulk, or that Benedict Arnold will change sides, even though there's nothing indicating on the cards or when the player plays his character? And my answer is a resounding yes. If you know your history, huzzah! And if you don't, that's why you should have studied it.
You'll learn pretty quickly, I guess.
Yeah, actually, there's two things here. One, first of all, the game may not be completely historical, right? It may allow you to deviate from history. Mm-hmm. Like Benedict Arnold might not be a traitor in the game you're playing. George Washington might be a traitor. Probably not. But you know what I mean? It could be someone else. Like, for example, in the old classic game of Dune, Harkonnen player has traitors in other people's, but it's not necessarily the same character that was a traitor in the book/movie. The other thing is this is not so much a theme thing, but it's also sometimes just a gameplay thing. Twilight Circle is always the one I know about because there is cards that once that card shows up, I go, oh, having knowledge that card existed would really help me in this game. For example,
Yeah.
there's a card that kicks everyone out of Japan and gives Japan over to America. Well, I'm not going to fight for Japan very strongly if I know that card exists.
Right. And hasn't shown up yet.
So I don't know what are you supposed to do? Let's say you did know that Bruce Banner turns into Hulk. Are you supposed to purge that from your mind?
Yeah. I mean, even though you might have knowledge of the historical situation or the IP situation, but you don't know how that's implemented in a game yet. It's more knowledge of the game that's important. Steve wants to know whose fault it is.
Eric Summer.
I didn't do it. Bad rule books, broken games, little to no play testing, second editions. We blame companies for not doing enough play testing, but we want it now. No more delays. We buy games, then leave them on the shelf and shrink, never knowing if the game is any good, or we play them one time and complain they don't have enough replayability. We spend a lot of money on games because of the minis, even though the rules are trash or the same as 5 other versions of the game. Bad rule books are tolerated because people are going to watch a Watch It Played or How to Play anyhow, right? Why make so much effort on the rule book since nobody will read it, except when they're stuck and need the rules to be clear and easy to find? Is this all the fault of the game companies, or have the people spending or throwing their money gotten companies used to the idea of get it out now, because if we wait 6 months, the fad will be over and these will never sell? Did we bring this on ourselves? Steve wants to know.
I would like to point out that I'm still blaming the company. There's no way I'm going to blame the consumer for the company putting out a shoddy product. Just because consumers want everything now doesn't mean it has to. And besides, there are some really amazing games where people waited years for them to come, and they did an amazing job. Everyone is dying and dying for the next Stonemaier game to come out. When they do, I would call them anything but shoddy. Just because, and bad rule books and stuff, I think a lot of it just because the effort wasn't put into it, and there's also human error and things like that. I don't know. I mean, sure, there's this headlong rush in consumerism. There's no question that's occurring to some degree. But so what? I'm still going to blame you if you mess up. Like, that's kind of like the guy be like, well, I did a bad job painting your house, but society, man. Yeah,
so taking a small piece of this, what do you think about the pressure being taken off of rulebook editors to have a clear, concise rulebook because they have contracted somebody like Rodney Smith to produce a video for their explanation? Do they rely too much on the video explanation?
Is there proof that this is happening?
I don't know.
Like, I find that the companies that go out of the way to hire a rules video person often then have a good rule book.
That's true.
You know what I mean? It kind of goes hand in hand. It's the place that has more security measures in place tends to be a safer place anyway. They're already doing things right. The person who says, hey, will you check this for grammatical errors, is already probably writing in really good grammar. That just seems to be par for the course. So, I don't know.
Makes
Sounds
sense.
like a good thing for people on the internet to argue about in one of our forums. You can find them on Dicetower.com or our Facebook forums. It's something interesting, though. Who is at fault? Is it us? Or is it the companies? All right. Let's go, Doctor Who, and go back in time.
That's my TARDIS sound.
That was terrible.
Working on it.
It's a Dice Tower Top 10!
The Dice Tower's Top 10 list is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.
I have said this on record before, and I will say it again. 2004 is one of the greatest years for games ever. There are still some big name games from this year that we talk about, and we'll be getting to those soon. Games that have done really well, and it's hard to believe they are 15 years old at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was, I believe, my first Origins 15 years ago. There's a lot of games that changed things that came out this year. So I want to talk a little bit about that before we get to our top 10. So Betrayal at House on the Hill is certainly a game that is still being played to this day. I just saw someone playing in our game group the other night. Saboteur, San Juan, the sequel to Puerto Rico, came out. War of the Ring is not in my top 10, but that, especially since this was only the first edition that came out. But that's weird. It came out 15 years ago, and this was a big deal. This was, by the way, you can go back to those Risk people and play War of the Ring, too, by the way.
There you go, yeah.
One of the games that came out this year that still gets played, it just got played at our last meetup where I heard someone call someone else a filthy liar and to go back to England, is Cockroach Poker.
Ah.
Because you are a filthy liar in Cockroach Poker. It's a very simple game, but it's one that gets played a lot. Axis and Allies had the revised edition come out, which kind of changed Axis and Allies around. And Doom came out this year, which doesn't get played by anyone anymore. But the important thing about Doom was it was the impetus for Descent, which then opened up the doors to have a gazillion of these dungeon crawlers come through.
Yeah.
Wings of War came out, which was a big thing that, eventually X-Wing came from. That's why I'm saying this year's important, because there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Ys came out this year. If you've never played Ys, not a big deal, right? But this was the first game from a small company called Istari, who then went on to make some really, really popular games. Camelot Legends came out this year from a small company that no one really thought much about called Z-Man Games. And then look what they went on to do. Cluzzle came out around this year, and I mention that because North Star Games, another small company that no one really talked much about. One of the kings of the industry during this time was Uberplay.
Yes.
They were publishing games and making light, family-friendly games. And they had a spin-off come out in 2004 called Simply Fun. Now, I believe Simply Fun exists to some degree today. It's hard to tell because they don't really mix with the board gaming circles much. But it's essentially a board game Tupperware party.
Yeah. Neat in concept. And they had like their own simple version of Catan, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that was one of the things. And I'm actually looking it up online to see if it still exists. Yeah, it says here, Simply Fun, and they're showing off some of their games online. So I guess it's still around.
Yeah.
So, but it's kind of weird because it's like a sideline to our industry now, but at the time it was a big deal. One of the things I thought was interesting is this was the year Heroes Inc. came out. Heroes Incorporated would not make my top 30 superhero games. But in 2004, it would have made the top 3.
Wow.
Because there was almost no superhero games at all. So I'm glad they've changed that. Leapfrog came out in 2004, which was, I believe, the first game from the Fragger brothers.
Yes, I think so.
And Major League Baseball Sports Clicks came out, which was a pretty decent sports game. But what's more notable about this was the last game, I believe, or very close to the end, of WizKids Part 1. Because WizKids is actually 2 different companies. WizKids essentially shut down very shortly after this. And then they were revived several years later where they brought back HeroClix and revamped that. And then they came out with Quarriers and Dice Masters and all that stuff. Now they produce like 6 million games a year. But maybe not that many, but feels like a lot.
Close.
2004 was an exciting time. There was a lot of great Euro games. Euro games still ruled the roost to some degree. If you liked non-Euro games, it was not as chic to like that sort of thing at this point, I feel.
Okay, sure. There's a notable exception on our list, I think.
There is a notable exception, and I want to talk about that notable exception when we get to it. But it's going to be a while before we get there.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, let's start with the worst game on the list.
Number 10.
My number 10 was my number 9 when we did this list 5 years ago. That's Ultramare. It's a trading game with these multi-use cards that can be used to trigger actions as well as be goods and be money. And I had the original cartoony artwork, which is the one that came out in 2004, version of this. Then there was a nicer looking version that came out a few years later. I just enjoyed the trading and the traveling and using cards for different things. I thought it was a neat concept, and it's still on my list. Ultramare, number 10.
Yeah, I think here's the thing. I think it was fine, although the very first edition of this had teeny weeny pieces. They actually made a version that was like 3 times the size. Do you remember that? You might not have played the very first version.
I think I had the very first version, yeah.
It was tiny.
It was a pretty small box, yes.
I just don't think Ultramare, today if it came out, people would be like, whatever. It wouldn't pass muster at all. The only reason it shone was because this kind of game there wasn't a ton of in 2004. My number 10 is one of the first drafting games that came out. I want to say, I don't think it was the first, but it was certainly close, and that's Fairy Tale. Nowadays, there's Sushi Go and Seven Wonders and all kinds of drafting games. Drafting's a big part of games, but Fairy Tale, you simply drafted cards and tried to get combos and get big points. That was it. And it was great, and I loved it, and it was one of the first, I don't know, it was one of the first, like, of these simple card games that people who were, because there was a lot of heavy Euro games being played around this time, but the heavy Euro game crowd started looking at these smaller card games and go, oh, some of these are pretty neat, and this was one that took off. This was not the only one. We'll talk about one that probably took off even more a little bit later, but Fairy Tale was certainly one of those. That's my number 10.
Number 9.
Number 9 is a lovely adventure game called Lost Valley, as you travel and explore in this map looking for gold, more or less. You have to equip your settler with tools and storage space for what they find, and you go hunting for animals and look for gold, and then have to head back home in order to resupply. It's a neat concept for a game. It got a re-implementation a few years ago that sort of streamlined things. But this original version was pretty solid as well. My number 9, and my number 8 last time, Lost Valley.
It was my number 5 in 2005 when I did the best games of 2004 in episode 12 of the Dice Tower.
Wow.
So that's interesting. We've actually reached the first time where we've done a list that was at the very beginning of the Dice Tower.
Yes. This was just the Dice Tower was just a glimmer in your eye at this point.
No, it was actually an existing thing. But anyway.
Sure.
Lost Valley is very fun. It was probably my number 11 on this list. I really like it still. It's fast actions and stuff. I would like to see it. They did a re-implementation of it, but I'd like to see a really nice one. The re-implementation was okay. But that was Eric's number 9. My number 9 is higher on Eric's list, but I will get there even if I have to pay extra money.
Number 8.
Number 8 is the only thing that wasn't on my list 5 years ago. That's Maharaja. Palace building in India. It's an area control game, lots of little cities all over the board, and you're moving around and trying to gain influence in them. It uses secret actions. You've got like a little action dial with 2 hands on it, kind of like a clock, and you will select which actions you want to do, and then all reveal, and you can move around, and you can place stones and gain influence and stuff. You can also affect the order in which these cities are scored. So you may really like go all in on a particular zone, but then somebody can mess with the order and maybe that zone doesn't score for a while and you're stuck having spent a lot of your resources on doing something that isn't going to help you much for a little while. Really solid game and neat interaction between the players. Maharaja, Palace building in India, my number 8.
One of the things that was interesting about Maharaja was that it was not a point-based game. It was a race game to be the first one to build the palaces, which I liked. It had a different feel to it than other games. Didn't have a very interesting box cover or theme, but it was a neat concept.
Yeah.
My number 8 was not on my top 10, and 2005. I don't know when I just keep playing this game over and over, and that's Tumbling Dice, which is weird to think that this is 15 years old now.
Wow.
To be fair, my versions of Tumbling Dice have gone beyond the pale, using everything from round dice to 17-sided dice to very weird variations on the game. But even the base game, I still really like just throwing dice down, some dexterity, a little bit of luck, a lot of fun, Tumbling Dice.
Number 7.
Number 7 was my number 5 last time. That's Ingenious, a lovely little abstract from Reiner Knizia. If you have a fan of dominoes, this is the game to move them to a new step. You're trying to connect different lines of these symbols, but not make it too lucrative, because if you score like 5 points of something, the next player, if you leave it open for them, may score 6, and that's not helpful. Also, it's got that Reiner Knizia scoring thing where you can get a whole bunch of blue symbols, but if you don't have many yellows, you're only scoring a couple of points. So you have to build evenly and look for opportunities to get the stuff you are weak in order to do well in Ingenious, my number 7.
I always feel bad for Ingenious. If Ingenious had come out in 2005 or 2003, its chance of winning the Game of the Year Spiel des Jahres was very high. Mm-hmm. But it came out the same year as another game.
Yep.
Oh, poor Ingenious. Oh, well. It's a cool game. And in fact, there's an upgraded version of it with squares that I don't believe you've played, Eric, and for some reason its name is slipping my mind. But I'll mention it soon enough for sure. But that's a cool game. My number 7 is higher on Eric's list. I will keep building my way there.
Number 6.
My number 6 is higher on Tom's list, so I'm just going to dump all this plastic in a big Tupperware container.
Real quick, Axio is the game I was thinking of. That's very similar to Ingenious.
Ah, cool.
I think I might like it a little better than Ingenious, actually.
What?
Yeah, it's interesting because you can put out these little pyramids that give you one color of each tile that you place it next to. My number 6 is Jambo. Now, Jambo is in the 2-player Cosmos line, and this was around the time where the 2-player Cosmos line was losing its steam to become a pale shadow of what it was at the beginning of the decade, where it ruled the roost and Lost Cities looked scorn upon everybody else around them. Which is true, right? But Jambo was one of the last ones. They actually made a sequel/expansion to it called Asante, which is essentially the same game with some minor differences, and you can play them together. But Jambo was this game in which you were trading and trying to get a certain amount of money by buying and trading goods and messing with your opponent a little bit, and it's really well done. It has this deck of different cards in there. Many of the cards are different. There's tons of variety amongst these decks. And I really like this game a lot. If you ever get a chance, by Rudiger Dorn, that's Jambo.
Never played this one.
Number 5.
Number 5 was Tom's number 7. That is the most beautiful of the Carcassonne games. This is The City. This is the one that has wooden walls that come out about 1/3 of the way through the game. You start building out these walls around the outside of the assortment that you're building, which not only constrains where you're able to build, you sort of block sections of the board off, but it also offers opportunities for your meeples to stand on the walls and observe aspects of the tiles, certain buildings, which will earn you points if you're looking at them. So you can stand a guy on the wall and then try and build out so that they can see those buildings and earn some points. Plus there are turrets that you can, like towers that you can put out as well. It's really just a solid game. Carcassonne, The City, my number 5.
It was my number 7, and I really like this game. Carcassonne the City is now the game that I will teach new people first, mostly because my Carcassonne has 6,000 expansions. But I really like it, and Eric's right. It's kind of funny. A game that came out 15 years ago is the nicest Carcassonne that's out there, I think, still. Although some of these Carcassonne Around the World games look pretty cool, too. My number 5 is higher on Eric's list, where he will probably explain the correct way to play it.
Number 4.
I wasn't going to go there. My number 4, Tom's number 5, is No Thanks, a lovely little card game about trying to get as few points as possible, but you still have to take cards, and you can pay to not take a card. But eventually you're going to have to take cards, which might earn you some chips that people have spent to not take that card. And if you can get strings of cards, then you're going to have fewer negative points. It's a neat push your luck concept. Very simple to explain, but offers some lovely tension in such a small package. No Thanks, number 4.
Yeah, this game has me almost like this stress disorder now. I'll get out No Thanks, and someone's like, how do you play? And I'm like, I'm not sure. Let me look at the rule book. Okay, I think I'm right now. I do love this game. I've taught No Thanks so many times over the years. I've taught it in 2019 already. This is just one of those games that works so well. It's so easy to teach. It's so easy to play. It's such a great little game. And that concept of just push. Now, it's funny when I play with new people. I was teaching some new people this. They didn't play many games at all. And so like the 33 came up and the person was like, nah, I guess I'll take it. And I was like, well, at least get some chips before you take this.
Yeah.
I don't want to say you're playing poorly because that's rude, but you're not playing well. Yeah. All right. My number 4, Eric mentioned back in the Q&A, and that's Memoir 44. This is this was part of a 2-punch by Days of Wonder that put them head and shoulders above every other company this year. If they had only come out with Memoir, we'd all have applauded them. It took the little plastic toy miniatures and put them in the board games. It's been already done by, Risk and Externalities, but they took a tactical game and it just exploded. It was so well done. Now, wargamers can, go all day long about how this isn't a real war game, but I learned a lot about World War II from playing these battles. I think it simulates them on a light level very well, and it's so much fun to play, especially if you play the big Overlord version of it. There's been a lot of different of these variations of what's called the Commands and Color system. This wasn't even the first one. Battle Line was the first one, a Civil War one. But this one took Battle Line and made it better. And there's been a lot of different versions that have come out over the years, but this one is still one of the best. Easily Memoir 44.
Yeah, this made my short list. And I was surprised to see that the Overlord rules, the Overlord expansion, came out also this year.
I'm not sure, Eric. I don't think that's correct, actually.
Really?
I saw that in Board Game Geek, and I distinctly remember the Overlord expansion coming out in a later year. And when it first came out, the rule set was in the box. That's the only thing I can think of.
Oh, so the rules existed
in the box.
Okay.
And then you could buy 2 boxes and put them together. So that was Overlord. But that little Overlord expansion didn't come out till a couple years later.
That seems surprising that not only would they have this and the other big box game that they released, but also an Overlord expansion. Okay, that makes more sense.
Number 3.
Number 3 was my number 3 the last time I put this list together. That's Richard Breese's Reef Encounter. Just such a solid game about building coral reefs and protecting them with your little shrimp, and adjusting the supremacy of the different styles of coral. It looks lovely. But it also is quite the brain burner as you try and manipulate all of these tiles to do what you want them to do to earn you points at the end. Go Parrotfish. Reef Encounter, my number 3.
Yeah, this is certainly one that was it on my list back in 2005? It was my number 6. I still really like it. I think it's just been a long time since I played it. This is one that it's so pretty and yet so at odds with how it plays. Because you ain't nice in this game at all.
Oh, no.
And it had a few fiddly rules. It could have been done better. For example, it have a list of actions you could take and how many action points, and one of them was do nothing.
Yes.
So you'd be like, I will do nothing. Then I'm going to do this.
I will do nothing. Yeah.
Now I will do nothing. It's like, stop it.
Maybe that was just you.
No, because I didn't want it. I'm not dorky like that in games hardly at all. Well, much. Anyway, my number 3, Dungeon Twister, which I don't believe I played in 2004, but Man, Dungeon Twister. Now, I'm still waiting for Dungeon Twister 3rd edition or something, because Dungeon Twister had a whole pile of expansions, of which only a few made it to America. The rest were in France. Then they made Dungeon Twister Prison, which was a 2nd edition of sorts with miniatures, and they never did any expansions to that. Then they did Dungeon Twister, the card game. Whatever. Dungeon Twister is still a great game. It has a cool theme in which you have these people trapped in this dungeon that are twisting around, but it's all strategy, very little luck in this game at all. And it's kind of like a sports game between the different teams. I really enjoy how it plays. Dungeon Twister.
Number 2.
Number 2, Tom and I sync up with. And I'm almost surprised that this hasn't moved up to your number 1, Tom. But Ticket to Ride.
It was my number 1.
It was when in 2004?
It was, because I hadn't played my number 1 quite right away.
Ah, okay. Well, Ticket to Ride is such a fantastic game. We already mentioned it. Often called a gateway game, although on the heavier side of gateway. But works with so many different people. It's been a tremendous success. It won the Spiel des Jahres. It's a great game with all of its variations now. My kids have played this. There is a kids version of Ticket to Ride, but the original is still strong, tense, terrific. Ticket to Ride, my number 2, and Tom's as well.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I still remember the president of Days of Wonder saying, "Oh yeah, this game's going to win the Spiel des Jahres." And I said, "Are you sure? That seems kind of a bold claim to make about your game." After I played it, I was like, huh. And even more interestingly, when the Spiel des Jahres, every year when it comes up, there's this big, long debate on the odds of the games, of which ones will win, which ones people think won't win. There was like no arguments this year. Everyone's just like, "Oh, Knizia, sorry about Ingenious." And the other 3 games, of which no one even remembers what they are at this point, because Ticket to Ride has it.
Yeah.
And it just went on to be a phenomenal hit. You know, you see these games, they don't come along, just 1 or 2 of them every 5 years, and Ticket to Ride was the one that came out and is still going strong to this day.
And yet, we each have a game that we like better than it.
Well, sure, just because I think it's one of the best and easiest gateway games ever doesn't mean it's necessarily my favorite game, although it's very high on my favorites lists.
And finally, number 1.
Well, that number 1 for me is Power Grid, arguably Freedom and Freeze's strongest game. I love the system. I love the market of goods. In fact, if you heard Dice Tower Tonight this past week or so, I talked about his new game Futuropia, which shares a lot with Power Grid. It has a sort of a similar rolling market. It's also a strong economic game, and you're trying to make your economy work, but almost in every aspect, I felt that Power Grid was stronger. It is such a solid game and still stands up after 15 years as a great system. It's fantastic. It's tense. It's difficult. It has a lovely arc as it accelerates. I love the way that the power plants get stronger and better as you move forward in the game. It's fantastic. Power Grid, my number 1. And Tom's number 9, it looks like.
Oh, yes. Well, I like it, and it's just that there were so many great games that came out this year. I think Power Grid is one of those few heavy games that I really enjoy. It's been a bit since I've gotten it to the table, so I would like to play it again at some point soon. But there's in all the different maps. South Korea is still my favorite, but even just the base game I could play over and over again. Eric's right. It's a fantastic game. My number 1 is a game that turned toys into a legitimate thing, and people bought Hasbro games and were proud of it, and that's HeroScape. For 5 years, HeroScape was the bomb. And then for the next 5 years, it was really expensive and hard to find because they stopped printing it. And then for the last 5 years, it's kind of, people forgot about it. But HeroScape was amazing. 3D terrain, miniatures from all throughout time and space fighting each other. And for a fairly reasonable price, everything was. There was no collectability. You were able to see what you bought. And it was simple. It was fun. It was, I don't know. Once I started playing it and collecting it, I remember when I got it, my wife said, "You're not getting back into miniature games, are you?" And I was like, no, look, it's already pre-painted and stuff. And I'm just going to buy the starter set. I won't get anything else. I meant it.
At the time.
At the time, yes. But I still like HeroScape. I don't play it nearly as much these days, but I can't get rid of all my stuff. I love it. In fact, I talked about it today in the top 10 most annoying characters in games. I thought of a HeroScape character because I really like going through all these characters and using him. So much fun. So the whole thing is just a little entertaining game to play. They even made a Marvel HeroScape. I wish they had made more of it, but I still get custom figures for the game from time to time. But my number one game from 2004, HeroScape.
It was my number 6 as well, and one that's seen some playtime with my kids. The toy factor of this is so strong. The bins actually live in my son's room, and he will occasionally pull it out, make a map, have an adventure. I've played by the rules with them a few times, just to force them to say, all right, we're going to play this for real. Here we go. This is how the game is played. But a lot of the time they just want to play with all of those figures and just have adventures, which is fine as well. Really, it's a neat system, and I'd love to track down some of those expansions that people no longer care about if they really don't care about them anymore.
Yeah, have fun.
Yeah.
All right, so the People's Choice, their number 10 was Ingenious, agreeing with Eric. 9, Fairy Tale, agreeing with myself. 8, Saboteur.
Yeah.
So this was kind of an interesting game that really got a lot of playthrough, and I like it, although I feel like the game can fall apart. You know, if the saboteurs, I mean, sometimes it's like a meal-born variant almost.
Yeah.
7 is San Juan, did really well. That's a sequel to Puerto Rico, the card game version of Puerto Rico, which really didn't feel like it was Puerto Rico, and then paved the way for the Race for the Galaxy card game, which really took off like a star.
Yeah.
6 is Suro. So this one's interesting because this game is basically responsible for the success of Calliope games. I mean, they have a lot of other games, but Suro is their biggest game by far.
Right, and they're still using that franchise. They're kickstarting the Phoenix one right now.
Right. So there's another version coming out, and they had the Suro of the Seas. It's a very simple connection game, and people like it. Number 5 is Memoir 44. Number 4, Betrayal at House on the Hill. I knew this one would be on the list, despite it having broken scenarios and not necessarily the best of game mechanisms. It's like a beloved cult classic.
It's an experience game, yes.
3 was No Thanks, 2 was Power Grid, and 1 is Ticket to Ride, and that's no surprise. I would have picked those 3 to be the top 3 games easily.
Yeah.
Because all 3 of those games are in print, I think, right now.
Yes.
I mean, if you think about it, actually, the top 6 games of the People's Choice are all in print.
Yeah.
Ticket to Ride, Power Grid, No Thanks, Betrayal, House on Hill, Memoir, and Suro.
I think San Juan is also still in print. There was a new printing of that in the last couple of years.
And Saboteur and Fairy Tale were just reprinted in the last couple of years also.
And Saboteur has a new board game version, I believe, coming out as well.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I challenge you. Change my mind. 2004 really was one of the best years. And this is coming after 1999, where we did that online 5 years prior, where I was like, we're trying to scrape 10 games together. I had no problem making this list.
Yeah, no.
No problem. I could have made a top 10 out of the games I didn't pick. So, what a good year. And it brings back so many memories because I remember going to the Origins and stuff. What a good time. But let's come back to 2019. Folks, if you have not backed our Kickstarter yet and you want to, don't delay. It's almost over. For those of you who have backed it, we really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing. We passed the stretch goal. Eric, we're going to have some guests on our show this year.
All right.
So we'll start getting those together and bringing people on. And hopefully that will be a lot of fun for y'all to listen to.
Hopefully.
I'll wait till we get to the letter J. That'd be pretty mean of me, wouldn't it?
Okay.
Well, anyhow, folks, thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Eric Summerer.
And you've been listening to The Dice Tower.
Thanks for listening. Promotional consideration has been provided by game publishers in the form of review copies of games. This episode, number 592, was recorded on January 31st, 2019. Next week, Mandy and Suzanne assemble a new episode for you, and in 2 weeks, Tom and I begin our alphabetical journey with a new top 10 list. Support for this podcast comes from listeners like you. Thank you for spreading the word. And speaking of support, the Jack Vassell Memorial Fund is dedicated to providing support to members of the board gaming community in their hour of need. Find out more about the fund's mission and how you can help at jackvassal.org. The Dice Tower is produced by Tom, Mandy, Suzanne, and Eric, with production assistance from Itai Perez, Roy Cannaday, and Rob Siri. Our theme was composed by Timothy Pinkham. Our statue of Zelda's hero that we slapped in Bilbo's backyard brought to you by Brass Link in Shire. And hosting is provided by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games at great prices at coolstuffinc.com. We love feedback. Visit the Dice Tower Guild at BoardGameGeek.com, email us at dicetower@gmail.com, or follow us on Facebook. And of course, you can find more from the Dice Tower Network, including the Out of Game podcast, Board Game Corner, Board Game Design Lab, the D6 Generation, the Family Gamers, the Portal Gaming Podcast, Every Night is Game Night, Cardboard and Wine, and Board Game Breakfast at dicetowernetwork.com. Until next time, from all the gang at the Dice Tower, have fun gaming. So are there any good dodgeball games?
I played a paintball game. I don't think I played a dodgeball game. I played Capture the Flag.
There was one. I played a prototype about Wizard Dodgeball once.
Oh, I remember hearing about that. Did that ever get published? It
I don't
probably
know.
did.
Probably.